Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm Carl Fippinger. I work at the International Code Council, and I'm the Code Council's Vice President of Fire and Disaster Mitigation in our Government Relations Department based in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon titled FEMA's New Disaster Recovery Grant Policy for Code Enforcement and Administration. I want to just take a quick moment to remind everybody that we have entered Atlantic hurricane season and that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Climate Prediction Center is predicting another above normal Atlantic hurricane season for 2021. NOAA forecasters predict a 60% chance of an above normal season, 30% chance of a near normal season, and only a 10% of a below normal season. Having said that, average seasons are based on the most recent 30-year climate record. For the Atlantic hurricane season, what that means is an average season is 14 named storms now, with 7 hurricanes, 3 of which are major hurricanes at a category 3, 4, or 5 level, and this remains unchanged in the updated 30-year climate record. The good news is experts do not anticipate the historic level of storm activity seen in 2020. So for 2021, NOAA anticipates 13 to 20 named storms. That means winds 39 miles per hour or higher, of which 6 to 10 could become hurricanes. That means 74-mile-an-hour winds or higher, and of those 3 to 5 major hurricanes, category 3, 4, or 5, carrying winds of 111 miles an hour or higher. So NOAA's confidence in these ranges is about 70%. So not 100%, of course, but still what we have to work with, and certainly something to pay attention to. So with that as context, and realizing that the multitude of risks our communities are facing from all hazards, it's certainly great, and include the hazards of things like high wind, flood, wildfire, and others. We're coming together today, and we're going to discuss an important new policy from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and their public assistance program titled Building Code and Floodplain Management, Administration, and Enforcement. So we're going to break that down for you. This new policy was developed as a result of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, otherwise referred to as the DRRA. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel today. With us, we've got Sarah Bender, Public Assistance Officer and Branch Manager with the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. Veronica Chavez, Policy Analyst, Public Assistance Division with Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Region 6 in Denton, Texas. Rebecca Dake, she's Outreach and Training Specialist in the Floodplain Management Insurance Section of FEMA's Region 6 in Denton as well. John Gargiola, our good friend and lead physical scientist in the Building Science Branch at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Sarah Mulligan, joining him also from headquarters. She works as Supervisory Emergency Management Specialist in FEMA's Public Assistance Division in Washington. And then also Jim Oak. Jim is one of our members and also a good friend, a building official from the city of Garland in Garland, Texas. And certainly last but not least, Michael Renner. Mike is our Director of Development of Recovery Services at Four Leaf Incorporated in the private sector, based out of California. So welcome to you all. Having said that, our agenda today is fairly simple. It's going to be a quick hour. I've done kind of the introductions and the housekeeping pieces, and now what we're going to do is transition into a presentation from our partners at FEMA, both the FEMA region and headquarters staff, and we're going to go ahead and go through that for about the next 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll transition into moderated discussion amongst all of our panelists in reaction to that, and do a quick wrap up and closing comments. As a reminder, we will be taking your questions during the moderated discussion. The Q&A portion of that is located in the bottom right corner of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time. We're also recording this event today, and we'll be posting it on our website at iccsafe.org. We've also got another vanity area of our website set up, so a special area within our website set up just for this presentation today. It's iccsafe.org/DRRA 1206. And we'll go ahead and put that in the chat here in a little bit as well. So with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce Sarah Mulligan. Again, Sarah's with the Public Assistance Program out of FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And Sarah, I will go ahead and queue up your slides here and let you take it away. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
And just let me know that you can see those well, and let me know when you'd like to advance them.
Excellent. So Veronica and I are going to kind of split up these slides from the public assistance side. So I'll just do a quick introduction. I think we were kind of all introduced at the beginning, but Sarah Mulligan, I'm with our policy and regulations branch at FEMA headquarters, and I'll turn over to Veronica for the first couple slides.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm Veronica Chavez with the FEMA Public Assistance Branch at Region 6 in Texas. And just welcome everybody. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about the public assistance program policy that offers post-disaster code administration and enforcement assistance to local governments under the new DRRA section 1206. We can advance the slide. Thank you. So the DRRA 1206 authorizes FEMA to provide state, local, tribal, and territorial governments with additional resources needed to effectively administer and enforce adopted building codes and floodplain ordinances. These activities fall into 4 primary categories, which we will go into a little bit more detail, specifically about the code enforcement side and the building code administration. But those primary areas are building code administration, such as collecting fees, reviewing and processing building applications, hiring, training, supervising staff. Code enforcement, examples of that would be inspecting structures, reviewing elevation certificates, conducting and processing condemnation determinations. In the floodplain management, regulation and administration and enforcement, again, hiring, training, supervising staff would be an eligible reimbursable activity under the FEMA Public Assistance Program, providing training, processing permits. And then lastly, again, under the floodplain management side would be substantial damage operations. So conducting field surveys, preparing cost information, performing inspections, and those types of activities. Next slide, please. All right, so this assistance is available anytime that a FEMA public assistance major disaster is declared. That will include categories C through G, which is permanent work. And these particular activities would be captured under a category G project worksheet. Any work conducted by a local government to administer and enforce adopted building codes and floodplain ordinances in the disaster damaged areas will be eligible for reimbursement for 180 days directly following the declaration. So just to rephrase that, the work needs to be conducted within that first 180 days after the declaration in order for it to be reimbursable. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Veronica. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the eligibility criteria for the public assistance program. Realize some of the folks on the call might not be as familiar with our program, but hopefully this isn't too much in the weeds. So regarding work that is eligible, so all public assistance programs, like all federal grants, have a whole suite of eligibility considerations, but kind of specifically on this slide targeting the work side of it, the policy has a very detailed list of eligible work, but the intent there is more to describe the types of work that would be eligible. So kind of the parameters. So generally speaking, work that falls within that list or is kind of similar to work described in that list would be eligible for reimbursement for that 180 days, as Veronica was just mentioning. Work, in order to kind of determine what work is eligible, there's not kind of like one strict way we do it, but generally it would be whatever the community normally would do after a disaster to enforce its building codes or floodplain management regulations would generally be considered eligible. That's the work they would normally do. We're supplementing that with additional federal assistance. Things that kind of go way above and beyond, I think we would kind of look at a little bit more skeptically, like, because I think the intent here is for the federal government not to be involved. This is the type of work you were doing, and we're just going to provide that extra bit of assistance to make sure it's done accurately, it's done well, and it's done in a timely manner. And all work, because this is FEMA's public assistance program, and our authorities come to us by statute, it all has to relate to disaster damage. So we're not necessarily going to be funding supplemental costs to permit to give an individual a permit for for say like a kitchen rehab. So it really has to go, all work has to be tied directly back to the disaster damage. But unlike some of our public assistance projects that we would actually, hammer and nails repair a building, we can do this for public, private, residential structures. So if a Walgreens has a roof that was blown off in a hurricane and they need a permit, and the local community needs to do some inspections in order to make sure that the work is being conducted in accordance with their adopted rules, then that would be eligible, even though the actual work to put that roof back on the Walgreens wouldn't be eligible for public assistance, but the work in order to administer and enforce the building codes for that building would be. Couple of things, we talked a little bit, I just spoke about eligible work, moving on to ineligible work. Activities that aren't at all associated with the disaster damage. So kind of looking back at that example of the kitchen remodel, that's not an eligible activity because it's not a result of the disaster. Similarly, and unfortunately, for a lot, activities to update a community's laws, procedures, requirements aren't eligible. So, and the reason is because outdated or non-existent building codes is not a result of the disaster. So we can't fund it through the public assistance program. Next slide, please. But that type of funding would be eligible for other community or for other in other FEMA programs. So looking here for eligible work, just to kind of do a high level review of what is on the what's in the policy. We have, reviewing and process applications for building permits. I think this slide might be animated. Perfect. Hire, train, and supervise staff to conduct eligible work activities, providing training and outreach to the communities on what is required. Establish construction plan reviews and inspection processes that are necessary to carry out the eligible work, inspect structures, monitor impacted areas for permitted construction activities, identify and carry out corrective actions, and review and issue elevation certificates. So these are just the type of activities I think we specifically called out in the policy. Again, it can be more expansive than this, just so long as it fits within the normal procedures that the community has for these types of instances. Next slide. So kind of going along with the building blocks of the public assistance program, we've discussed what kind of work is eligible. And then another really important thing that we look at in determining what can be reimbursed are eligible costs. So all of our work through the public assistance program is subject to a cost share. And essentially that is typically 75% of the entire project would be covered by FEMA, and then 25% is covered by the local government. And the reason that is again, we're required to do it by law, but the intent is that FEMA their recovery work in partnership with state and local governments. And so in order to make sure it's a true partnership, there are costs incurred on both sides. So it's really, ensuring that costs are reasonable. As costs escalate, both parties have, kind of some skin in the game, as they say. So, so typically the local government or the local jurisdiction that's receiving this funding is subject to paying funding 25% of it themselves. Overtime for budgeted employees and straight time and overtime for extra hires. So that's basically what labor costs we were getting. If a community, a building department has straight time folks that are already budgeted, that's already funded, type of their normal operation and management costs, those are their costs to incur. Anything that goes above and beyond, say overtime for budgeted employees, FEMA can reimburse those funds, as well as extra hires that you need in order to perform the eligible work, both straight time and overtime, because those aren't budgeted. Those are extra costs incurred as a result of the disaster. And then purchase of supplies and equipment necessary to complete the eligible work as well. One question we got a lot about, which is why we included it on the slide here, are just that a lot of building departments, we understand that there are a lot of fees that are collected. Any fees that are collected are basically just deduced from the final project amount. So say, it's like a $50 application fee that's collected by the local government, and we're funding that work. It's a duplication of benefits if they're receiving that money from an individual and then also receiving the money from the federal government. So we just keep track of that and deduct it at the end. Next slide, please. And then community requirements, we're going to go over this just, just this slide. If there are additional questions, happy to kind of run through this with folks. But this would be our interface for our grant program is really good. It's transparent. There's a grants portal and a grants manager side that applicants can kind of trace their project as it works through our different eligibility and review queues. And so all documentation applications will eventually go into this portal. So applicants can really manage their own projects, see where it is, submit documentation to FEMA, and it's just kind of all there in one place. It's sort of like a TurboTax. You kind of just like work your way through the different prompts and different requests for documentation. As with any federal grant program, you have to demonstrate that work was completed, demonstrate that these were the costs that were incurred, location of the work, and then validate any other resource requests that you might have. So if you have, say, a community needs extra hires, they go to a contractor to receive that. Just need to know they procured it properly. This is the terms of the contract. This is how the what the rates are, just the details there. Similarly, if it's an emergency management assistant compact, we would just need to know what the terms are to make sure that we can just validate that the costs being claimed by the applicant are the costs that the applicant incurred. So I think that is it for my portion here. Thanks everyone, and happy to see their questions going on, so I'll turn my attention over there.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Dake. Again, training and outreach specialist. I'm in FEMA Region 6. We're located in Denton, Texas. So we just heard about the what the policy covers, and the when. When is this reimbursement available? So now I'm going to get into some of the why. So Congress passed the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, incorporating lessons learned after disasters like Harvey, Irma, Maria, wildfires, just to name a few. It has a lot of legislation, for response, recovery, but also pre and post disaster mitigation. And this section 1206, post-disaster building code, floodplain management, administration, and enforcement, it made it in there. That's awesome. This is a validation of your job, your role in your community's safety and resilience, and your important post-disaster responsibilities. So 1206 is meant to help speed that recovery and enhance post-disaster compliance. So on the floodplain side, I'm housed, there are minimum federal standards adopted, and some communities, enhance these by every NFIP participating community. The floodplain administrator's job is to assess damage from any source in the high-risk areas, make sure owners are getting permits for code compliant repairs and renovation. They're also inspecting for substantial damage, which are the most damaged and most at-risk structures. Now, this is similar to what you're doing as a code official, quickly assessing damaged, unsafe buildings, looking for that public risk. Whether there's a federal declaration or not, whether you're pursuing reimbursement allowed by this policy or not, you have post-disaster enforcement requirements. You're going to have new construction, you're going to have renovation, repairs, etc. So I really like this quote I saw recently from ICC. It stated, code officials are the foundation to safe, sustainable, and resilient communities. And that's exactly the same way I feel about the floodplain administrators. So our CBOs and our FPAs, we're brothers and sisters in this, and we need a good relationship here to benefit the community. So this policy can help speed these assessments, these inspections, substantial damage assessments, and allow for a resilient recovery, allowing for reimbursement for things like a needed surge in staff and other eligible work and costs. Thanks. Next slide, Carl. So substantial damage does account for whole sections of the policy. It's under eligible work and it's under direct assistance. It's mentioned 20 times in the 12-page policy. So what is substantial damage? It's commonly, and you may know of it as the 50% rule. So it's when the total costs to repair a structure to its pre-damage condition are greater to or equal 50% of the pre-damage market value of the structure. And that's in every NFIP participating communities ordinance. It's also in IBC, IRC, IEBC as well. And it's an important way to break the repeat cycle of flood damage. It's very similar to substantial improvement, whereby the total cost to improve a structure are equal to or greater than 50% of the pre-improvement market value. So both of these are a way to build or rebuild safe, sustainable, resilient communities. Substantially damaged structures, again, are our most damaged, most at-risk structures. So let's take these images, for example. Let's say this home on the left, this is in a high-risk flood area. It looks like it might be an older home. Its lowest floor is below where we know the water can rise to or above. If determined to be substantially damaged by the community, this home may need to be elevated, like in the image on the right. You can see how letting these homeowners know quickly what their rebuilding requirements are, that's so important before they're putting repair dollars back in their home. And this is not easy to tell a structure owner by any stretch. Hey, you can't just make repairs, you're going to have to elevate your home potentially. But on the flip side, not assessing for substantial damage and substantial improvement, not enforcing this, caving to the very real pressure that comes with this post-disaster situation is putting your family, kids, neighbors, grandparents, the list goes on, back in harm's way. It's keeping people and property at high risk. So you're either doing these assessments through your own code, or you should be coordinating with the floodplain manager. Now, the floodplain manager, they may not have a staff of inspectors. So, maybe a best outcome would be you working together on these assessments and, of course, all related permits, for that structure. Next slide, Carl. So there is an avenue when there's catastrophic situation for a community to request substantial damage inspection assistance through FEMA SD data collection contract. This is funded under a task order with the Risk Management Directorate under the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. But this process has changed, and it will now be a subject to a cost share for the disaster. So in the past, FEMA has helped communities with SD data collection, and that was at 100%. But now it's reimbursable through the policy. So people are going to want to know, hey, will FEMA still be doing or helping with these inspections? So my answer is it's possible, but we strongly recommend that you position yourself to be able to either conduct these or contract out or have an MOU to be able to do these inspections, on your own. It will likely be faster and money than going this direct assistance route. To go the route, you would have to submit a written request to the state, and they'll review it. They may send it on to the FEMA regional administrator, but that written request would have to include, hey, what are the reasons your government can't perform or contract for these inspections, a hold harmless agreement, and an agreement to that federal cost share. Next slide, Carl. So overall, I think the policy is awesome. It recognizes your critical post-disaster work, and it provides this avenue for reimbursement for that work and for those costs. However, I'll leave you with this point. All eyes are watching how we recover from an event. People and property are at risk. Are we building back into the repeat cycle of flood damage, or are we building back better? So here you'll see a government accountability report. It recommends, hey, FEMA has to do a better job of ensuring NFIP compliance, that we share data like NFIP claims, repeat flood losses, structures below the base flood elevation, and that we ensure communities are inspecting for substantial damage. And we're working really hard to deliver on these and help our communities get there. You'll also see a few articles here that show, people get sick of this cycle of repeat damage, and they are looking, to federal, state, and the local level to make sure we're holding up our end of the bargain. So I recognize, we all of the panelists recognize you have a tough job. You're the silent defenders. If you haven't already, start conversations with your leadership, with legal, your fellow permitting departments. Tell them what your post-disaster requirements and responsibilities are, floodplain and building code. And I think this policy can help facilitate that conversation. Next slide, and over to you, John.
Oh, great. I'll just build on the great information that was shared, as even the enthusiasm, because myself, I was a former building official before I came to FEMA. So I'm really excited to see that this is serving that community. But as you heard here, these are all the responsibilities and these are all of the activities that we have thought of that the work that gets done and is eligible for reimbursement. So, the question is, are you ready? And we have some more resource information to show you, but I just want to pause here in that question. Obviously, this topic is important. More than 400 of you have tuned in here, but you can help us and you can help each other. We have 2 poll questions for you. And we're going to put the two minutes on the time clock, and this will help us give you and us awareness of are you ready and where's the help coming from? So the first poll question you see here is, are you aware of Emergency Management Assistance Compact or interstate mutual aid compact agreements for resource sharing? And your choices are there, yes, no, or unsure. And think about it in the terms of your job and what you do. And then the second one, has anyone out there, have they done this? Have you or your jurisdiction used EMAC or IMAC agreements to request or share resources? So take a couple minutes there. I think there's a little more than a minute left, and I'm going to go on to the next slide, and we'll take a look at the results together. Next slide. Right. So from my point of view, mutual aid is going to be key because you only have so many staff and assets to deal with an incredible increase in workload. So how is that all going to work? Who's going to come to your aid? What options or plans are you following? We show an example here, even before DRA 1206, our friends in the USVI were inundated with the hurricanes, and they used EMAC to bring in, next slide, 10 inspectors from various states to help them right when they need it the most to perform building damage assessments, conduct building inspections, plan review, permit tech responsibilities. And the end result is that it all worked and it was all successfully reimbursed. Even last year, to a smaller degree in Louisiana, Hurricanes Laura and Delta marshaled the resources from ASFPM personnel, from the Louisiana chapter, as well as folks from the state chapters of AIA and the Louisiana Fire Marshal's Office to perform building safety assessments, substantial damage estimates, and they've documented everything, which is very important, and they're in the process of seeking reimbursement. Next slide. Again, as Rebecca and others have been saying, it's great that you're learning about this policy, that the help is there when you need it, but it's not going to come all by itself. So are you making these connections in your community? What does your state stance look like in terms of disaster resistance response teams that might help you in doing your job? Next slide. One of the things that FEMA has put together, both in fact sheets, and I'll show you an actual portal that you can go to, is for we've actually gone in and looked at the state laws, all 50 states, on how EMAC is handled, IMAC is handled, mutual aid agreements, utilization of volunteers or private citizens, how liability and credentials are handled. So these fact sheets, there's a link on the next page, next slide, will give you the snapshot in each region and each. You can go live to this portal, and these tabs along the top not only give you just building code information, what's been adopted, but what is the current landscape for their mutual aid, both in EMAC and IMAC. So let's look at the next slide. It's kind of what the legend says. If it's all green, that basically the state creates a statewide mutual aid program, automatically enrolls all jurisdictions, And really it's the jurisdictions that would opt out if they're not going to use it or they have some other way. Light green, so there's the statewide program, but it's not automatic enrollment, and the jurisdictions would have to decide to enroll. If it's pink, then it's really handled at the local level. There's no formal statewide mutual aid system, and the jurisdictions individually make mutual aid agreements. And then if there's nothing that we have found, then it's red. So it's important to know, what you're starting with in your state, and this is the first of this product. So as we refine it, update it, if you see any changes, let us know. Next slide. Okay, a little bit more on those layers. As I mentioned, there's basic EMAC legislation, and there's enhanced, and enhanced is going to go a little step further and actually permit the utilization of private and volunteer personnel as opposed to just government personnel. So it's important to know that distinction and how your state is set up, either to accommodate that or not. Okay, so next slide. So again, you can get the same information live through the portal, or these fact sheets are also accessible at that portal. Next slide. Great. So we've thrown a lot of information at you, but you should be able to find lots of resources that we've touched on. The policy itself, there's a web page, there's a video, launch of the policy, how this is characterized in the public assistance policy guide, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Great. Training, we saw a little bit of that FEMA grants portal. Maybe you haven't used that, but does your emergency manager know how to use that? Because that's going to be your critical ally in entering this project and getting the information in there and getting reimbursed for that. So there's some trainings and independent studies, as well as on the subject of substantial damage. Next slide. Awesome. So we have our information here that we're joining you today, but we don't want to end there. We want to encourage you. ICC's got a great network of government relations liaisons. Use them, and also use in FEMA in the regions. Connect with your building science points of contact, and so we've provided that information for you conveniently here. There's somebody to talk to or connect with, and if they can't help you directly, they'll reach out back to us. So I think that's all that I have, and I'm really interested and excited to see what the poll results show. Do we have that information? Okay, great. Okay, let's look at this. So we put first question about the awareness. Okay, just so look at the most responses are yes, a significant number of no, and some are unsure. And half of you didn't answer. I don't know why. It was not a difficult question. Okay, and then more importantly, have you actually done this? Have you got experience on that? Look, a small number of you have, and that's really great. I think we want to hear from folks like that in the future. And if you've done it, then you can share how you did it with others. Many of you have not done it, and many of you are unsure. So some good feedback there, to build off of. Thank you, Carl.
Of course, John. That's great. And thanks to everybody for replying on that too. Just a quick reminder that all of the presentation slides and a video of this webinar are going to be posted to the ICC website, and we'll make sure that they're out there on the website that I talked to you about earlier too. So it's ICCSafe, ICCSAFE.org. So ICCSafe.org/DRRA 1206. So we'll make sure that all that is out there. Also, our communications team And my colleague Liz McDonald will be making sure that everybody who's attended today and registered for the event will be receiving a post-event email with all that information and all those links in there as well shortly. So it may not be by tomorrow, but probably sometime by mid next week at the latest. So with that, I'd ask all of our panelists to come on in and join us, turn on your cameras, and let's transition into some good discussion. I want to kind of reintroduce Jim Olk, one of our members who's a building official from down in the city of Garland, Texas. And Jim also works with the Building Officials Association of Texas and their disaster response team. So having said that, I know you, Mike Renner from Four Leaf, might have some thoughts on all that you've heard here, from the local level, the private sector level, and then also we've also got our friend Sarah with us from Maryland Emergency Management Agency, who is a state level public assistance officer. So, we've heard the federal side of this. Maybe Sarah, we talked to you and then Jim and Mike a little bit about kind of how do you see this working for you? I guess what I would do is maybe Sarah, we'll start with you and just kind of ask, at the state level, how do you see this rolling out, and what are some of the ways that our code officials that are joining us today might be able to best engage with folks like you and your peers across the country in public assistance at the state level?
Sure, thank you. So at the state level, we are kind of the go-between between the local governments and the federal government. We're the pass through all of the funding. The policies typically from the federal government roll to us first. So what we really do in non-disaster time is try and roll that out to our local governments, and we do that through the local emergency managers. They're definitely our link to other county departments and local municipality departments. We also offer non-disaster time training for these types of things. So when DRA came out, there was a ton of new things, rolling that out and then saying, hey, what do you guys want, for us to come in? Primarily, we do damage assessment training, but we do include some of these new changes in there. Like as you're assessing damage, make sure you're thinking of these things, make sure you're tracking those costs. And then after a disaster, we're kind of doing the same thing as a just-in-time training, and we're that link as damage is being collected, as costs are being collected. We're there to be that reminder of, hey, these are the things that you need to look for, so that we can probably most importantly justify a disaster declaration, because we do use all of those costs to justify to FEMA and the president that we need federal assistance. So really just making sure to track those costs so that we can justify a declaration. And then so that if we do get a declaration, you're tracking costs from day one on those types of things. So then it's much easier to not have to backtrack and find, the time it took, maybe the permits, the invoices, receipts, things like that. It's much easier if you start at day one and then we collect it all post-disaster.
Yeah, so preparedness and documentation is super key. And, I think what's been interesting here too is that there are many of our folks that likely haven't participated in the public assistance process. So, literally all of us on here today have touched public assistance in one way, shape, or form or another throughout our careers. And for those that are new, what are maybe your top three for kind of getting organized? And I'm going to kind of pass that question after you, Don, to Jim, and see what he has to say from the local level. But what would be your top three to the officials on here today about getting prepared and being ready to be able to use this when it comes out?
So definitely making sure they are staying in touch with their local emergency manager is probably the most important. Making sure they have the most recent policies. We try to give templates for documentation. So really asking for those things early on. We try and match our really early on documentation to what FEMA is going to ask for later. So kind of checking on that. And if there is any kind of, training on things that you're really not sure, reaching out again to the local emergency manager so they can schedule that with us. And I will say one thing I did forget is as far as the technical aspects of these things, it's something like we as the state, we're not technical on like building codes and things like that. We reach out to our local building inspectors and like our engineers and things like that to make sure that, you know, we're not sure if a county's in compliance. So we will reach out and we ask that question from a technical aspect. Please tell us, you know, about this. And so we kind of try and keep that link going both ways.
Very good. Jim, I'll turn to you really quick. Thanks for that, Sarah. And I'm sure we'll come back to you here in a little bit as well. Jim, what's your advice to some of your peers here in the crowd today? And also, I guess I'd be remiss without saying that, you know, not only are we talking about code officials here, but we're also talking about floodplain managers and administrators at the local level too. So what's your advice to those folks based on your experience down there in Texas? And Jim, you're on mute.
Thanks. I ought to know better than that.
I caught you before you went too far.
There's a few things that I do appreciate that. There are a few things that I can certainly talk about as a local official. And just to let you know, here in Garland, you know, I've been here about 6 years and I've already dealt with 3 disasters, 2 tornadoes and a flood. So, you know, dealing with it from the point of disaster all the way through recovery, you know, it's a several-year process. I do like this, and I'm going to touch on this first with the DRRA 1206. It gets a step into recovery that we didn't have through FEMA before. And that's, to me, really important. You can certainly claim your post-disaster damage assessment, you know, as part of your PA. But once you got into recovery and you were attempting to do building inspections and code enforcement and those types of things and substantial damage estimates, you weren't able to really claim a lot of that, you know, as recoverable funds. So I like this. This is a way to do that. It's a way to step into that recovery phase once you're done your damage assessment and start doing that recovery. One of our tornadoes, we put a mobile building permit office right in the tornado area. We're a large community, so we just moved one office, you know, took our fire department emergency management bus and turned it into a mobile permit station. Some of that funds would now be recoverable where they weren't before through the PA and staffing that. So I see this as a way to either pay for the overtime that you got, hire temporary staff, use third party, or even do mutual aid with an adjoining community and be able to recover those funds in the long run. And I like that. And as long as that is modeled after and you put those folks in the disaster area, all that, you can gain a bunch of that money back that you would spend doing that. What would I say to building officials? First of all, be prepared. Be prepared for what you're going to receive. Make sure you've got the equipment that you need, the forms that you need, and the education that you need to enter yourself not only through your damage assessment phase, but through recovery. Know what your function is as a local building official, as a local floodplain administrator. Know what your function is following a disaster. Those are important things. I've gone to too many disasters, and in Texas, like I said, I run the damage response team, disaster response team through the Building Officials Association of Texas. We get a lot of disasters, whether they reach the FEMA level of declared disaster, we respond to them even at a local level. And so all this is prepared, whether you get a small disaster or a large disaster, it's all scalable through there. And but knowing what your function is and being ready for that recovery phase is really important, because people, as Sarah talked about, some of the others, that recovery is really important to get those people back into their homes, back into their businesses. One of the cities we did, Sonora, had a flood down in central Texas. Half of their community was impacted. If half of their community is gone, that community is dead, you know, and would be nothing but a desert, you know, later on. So those things are very important to know what we do and how we do that, and understanding that. And then, you know, as I said, working with your local emergency manager, whether that's at the city level or at the county level, knowing them and engaging with them and understanding where that all fits in is really important. We try and engage at all those levels, you know, at the local level, county level, state level, and at the federal level, so that we're ready to go and we can help wherever we can help.
Very good. Thanks so much for that. And, I'll turn to Mike Renner from Four Leaf here really quick too. So Mike, you bring us a little bit of a different perspective too. Your job is to kind of help folks like Jim and others to be able to get through these kinds of things from pretty early on. So maybe a little bit from you about, the work that you do, and then kind of how you see the 1206 piece maybe working in conjunction with your local officials to be able to bring them some capability that they haven't had previously for the first 6 months after a disaster.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. On our end, on the private side, we do have that unique ability to contract directly very quickly with municipalities, jurisdictions. We can come in and help with the initial surge. And by we, I don't mean Four Leaf, I just mean private industry as a whole. I think private industry and public-private partnerships are working better and better throughout the years. So my firm, we have the unique and I guess unfortunate responsibility of rebuilding many places here in California and Oregon after wildfires. So that's what we've been dealing with on our end. A lot of wildfires, earthquakes, floods, etc. And I wanted to echo something that Jim said that really struck me was the quicker you can tie people back to their properties, the more likely they're going to be to rebuild. So during this process, when you start throwing, we all know the typical development process can be very frustrating for professionals and for lay people. So the more you can remove that red tape and get people tied back to that property, get the temp powers in place, get the maybe the temporary modular structure in place, those are key points. And I think something that's echoed with all the panelists is proactivity versus reactivity. So if you're in a vulnerable area for any type of disaster, and maybe you're a smaller jurisdiction, or maybe you're not, or maybe get your contracts in place. It doesn't mean you have to use them. Reach out to private industry, reach out to your local partners for that mutual aid. Have it in place before it happens. We all know the history of the building codes. Building codes are generally reactive, so that's kind of the world we live in. But proactivity here is really key. And another thing with this particular FEMA program, and I think Jim echoed that really well. Thanks, Jim, for going before me. You gave me a lot of great talking points. The initial response and the rapid safety assessments of structures, that is a small sliver. That recovery goes for many years. So having those funds available for the recovery process is just a great thing. So again, I'll be available for any questions.
Very good. Thanks so much, Mike. I guess I'd ask the folks at FEMA, circling back to you, I think this is the first we're really kind of planting the flag here, so to speak, in terms of getting the word out about the new 1206 provisions. And in particular, our hats are off to our partners at FEMA Region 6 in Denton for leaning forward as far as they have to kind of put together a great program. And I know we're going to be working with you on other things down there in Texas and some of your other states. But what's the latest in terms of maybe other regions that you're hearing about, taking on this kind of an activity? So should maybe some of the folks that are attending today expect to see similar things in maybe other parts of the country through other FEMA regions? Who wants to take that one?
I can go first. Just like most of the FEMA regions have something called a regional interagency steering committee. I know a lot of our groups are trying to get on, hey, let's get some time. The audience for these, a lot of times it's state and local emergency managers. So again, trying to hit kind of that point of contact in the community who can then help spread it out. So the risk meetings, that's definitely something. Also from the FEMA headquarters side, they're working on some communication toolkits, and hopefully these will be posted online soon. So they're working kind of on what they call a 101, which is just super basic information. Hey, let's get a 2-pager out there on some general questions. What is this policy? How long? What does it cover? But they're also thinking about those next iterations. Hey, let's put out a 201, where now a lot of these questions that have been coming in from, of course, people like you, we need to be able to answer those with follow-up types of, whether it's a fact sheet or a new training. So I know those are some of the things that are in the works. John
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Sarah?
The other thing that we're all of us are working together on is working with our National Exercise Division to actually formulate a type of exercise. And you've heard of FEMA's national level exercise, but an exercise that is deployable, can be utilized in different regions. But basically, it would create a scenario, and there'd be role play, and we go through all the steps of all the things that that you might encounter, or maybe throw some wild cards in the mix. But we think there's value in exercising these types of critical actions at the beginning of the disaster. When the response and life saving is now, how are you going to deal with all of these damaged buildings, non-conforming buildings, unsafe buildings? And one of the great ways to do that is through an exercise. So we have that too in the works.
That's great. Well, and of course, as a partner with FEMA and in your partnership with us, we look forward to working on this and continuing to roll this out. I would just remind everyone that in the chat, I posted the website that we talked about earlier. That'll be a great way for folks to get all the information from today, and we'll continue to post information in there, best practices, lessons learned, and other tips and tricks as we get them and the program kind of matures or the policy matures in the field. It's www.iccsafe.org/DRRA 1206. And then, John, go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing, Carl, because I think that your members can look at the great work that ICC has already in place. And so you look at your operation, what is the shape of your plan review services, your permitting services, your codes and your digital codes. We all experienced in the pandemic. We have to figure out how to work virtually, right? So ICC has really, led been a trailblazer there. And so if some of these tools and services, can help the success of a 1206 mission, I encourage your members to take advantage of it, as well as the growing Disaster Response Alliance and the recent merger. Think of the power that comes behind ICC and the National Council of Structural Engineers Association. Disaster damage assessments, how do you do them? Go to the Disaster Strikes Institute. So I'm giving a lot of plug, but I believe in that stuff because I'm a former building code official. So
no, I agree, and that's exactly where I was heading next. I was going to say, kind of building on what you and Jim talked about. I was going to mention the Disaster Response Alliance, and the website for the alliance is disasterresponse.org. All one word, disasterresponse.org. And you can either do one of two things there. You can, one, if you are an official that wants to register and become part of that network to be able to help with post-disaster building safety assessments and habitability assessments and the kinds of things that Jim was talking about. We're happy to take your name in and take on your qualifications. And we've got a list of about 1,500 folks nationwide that we share with FEMA and other states and territories and tribal entities on a regular basis. So please feel free to take a look at that. And you can also request resources through that site as well. There are also a number of other state sites, and we'll make sure that we start to plug those into that 1206 microsite that we've got on our webpage to be able to give you some idea of where those resources are as well. So having said that, John, we talked a little bit yesterday during our kind of our pre-meet for this, and I think it was actually 2 days ago, but we talked about the 75-25 cost share. And I wanted to maybe start with you and then kind of go down through the state and local folks again to talk a little bit about maybe some of the best practices that you've seen in other PA grant applications post-disaster for being able to make up that 25% match at the state and the local level. So any thoughts on that piece, and then get some reactions from our state and local partners too?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a topic that everybody should be thinking about. And between all these networks, right, there's probably more volunteers than we can count on. But when you need them, Are they going to be there? Are they themselves been impacted? Or, if they come over into your jurisdiction, can they actually perform the work that, what are the credential, the licensing, the Good Samaritan law? So, you have to understand that. But whatever the way that you're leveraging and using those assets, all of that work, all of that time, all of that labor, that counts. That counts towards what you might put towards the match, the 25% requirement. So,
and you have to document, as Sarah said.
and you have to document it, right? And so, the folks in Region 6, again, through the floods last year, they've started developing some forms and some templates. Things are developing organically. I know there'll be a lot of attention to understand how does that grants portal work and what kind of level of detail is needed and acceptable. So this is an area of growing collaboration and development. It's absolutely essential, to help make up that cost share and do it and not leave any resources uncounted, right? And just volunteers out of the goodness of their heart. If they're not getting reimbursed, which they're also eligible for, then make sure you're counting them towards your cash cost share. Absolutely.
Sure. Sarah, in the couple of minutes that we got remaining, some quick tips from you on that 25% cost share from where you see it.
Yeah, I think probably one of the more underutilized things about it is donated resources. They always go unaccounted for. So we try really hard to establish that donated labor rate very quickly. For the state of Maryland, it's pretty high. I mean, it's almost $30 an hour. So we make sure to get that word out there to the local jurisdictions. Hey, make sure you're tracking this, because you can potentially get, it's like something like $29.51 an hour right now to offset, that 25%. So definitely getting that word out early, making sure they're documenting. I say documenting in everything that I say. I start everything with, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So
that's music to the ears of folks in the PA program. So good for you.
So the state of Maryland knows if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Jim, your thoughts from where you sit?
Yeah, certainly, as they say, documented. As we send people out, as we deploy people, we track, make sure that they're, that they're properly resource typed through FEMA's codes. So we know exactly who's out there, whether you've got a structural engineer out there, an architect, a building official, and what their reimbursable rates are at. And we track all that as we deploy people and make sure that's done. And understanding that, I'm at least able to do that when, I've got local disasters, but understanding that and how that works at the local level is utmost importance if you plan to get any money back. And having lived through the disasters and making it to a FEMA declared disaster and attempting to get that PA, I can tell you that it's a lot of work to make sure that you've documented all that and that you can display it so that you can get that money back. And they'll give it back to you, but a couple of years later, you're liable to get audited, and everyone's going to want it back if you haven't done your work. So you got to watch, how all that works on the FEMA side and make sure you've got your ducks in a row up front.
Yeah, no, very good advice. Mike, we got a couple minutes left here. How does this look from the private sector perspective? And I got to tell you, I really appreciate you looking at it from that level. I know the interest there is with Four Leaf and your employer, but you've done a really great job at speaking for the public-private partnership and the private sector. So, how are you guys looking at that?
Unfortunately, just as a whole, on the West Coast, I don't think these fires are going to get any better. We're going to continue to have these issues. The desirable places in a lot of the U.S. for folks to live, unfortunately, are subject to different types of disasters. So, as we continue to utilize new code, the ICC is instrumental in forwarding resiliency and innovation in building codes. And we look at these AMMRs and how do we build more resiliently, just as a whole. I personally, speaking for my firm, I'd like to work our way out of this business. We have plenty of other things to do, and I'm tired of rebuilding towns. I'd like to be more proactive and figure out how to stop these things from happening. But the panel here was just a wealth of information. This probably could have went on for 4 hours, and And I look forward to helping out again. Great work to all.
No, it's great to have you. And with that, our time is unfortunately up. An hour does go so quickly, as you pointed out. And we haven't really even talked about mitigation, and you touched on it there as we ended today. We did have a really great discussion with our other FEMA colleagues and some folks at the state, local, and private sector levels last week too. So check that out. It's going to be posted on our website. An email went out about that today, so we'll make sure that we maybe also include that one in today's email that goes out to everybody, so you can see the piece of, we talked recovery today and we talked new policy for recovery today, but also how do we push the envelope out and prevent some of the stuff from happening in the first place. We've got some great information for you on that as well. So I wanted to just wrap up by saying a big, enormous thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. We had over 400 people on this broadcast. And I'm sure we'll reach even more with the recording too. So thank you all so much for your time. If there were questions in the Q&A that were not answered directly, we have captured those. And I make the commitment to you that the Code Council will reach out and answer those questions that have gone unanswered, if there are any, and we'll contact those who ask those questions directly. And thank you for submitting them. So John, kind of as the senior fellow of the headquarters folks, thanks to you and Sarah, our folks at Region 6. Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you. And Jim, always a pleasure. Mike, great to see you. And thanks for your support of Building Safety Month and all the other great things that you guys do for us. With that, I'll wrap it up from here and maybe just ask our panelists to stay on for a few minutes. I'm going to request that our communications colleagues, Liz McDonald and some others, just put us back into the green room or practice session so we can wrap up before we go today. But with that, thank you, everybody, and have a safe rest of your day and week.